Midnight Whispers. The Forgotten Town. Hidden deep within the mist-covered hills of New England lay a town called Ashwick. Once a bustling mill town, it was now a desolate ruin, a place whispered about in the nearby villages but never visited. Its streets were choked with weeds, and its houses stood like silent tombs, their windows shattered, their roofs caving in. No one knew why Ashwick had been abandoned, but the stories were enough to keep even the bravest souls away. Except for David Hargrove. A journalist for an obscure paranormal magazine, David had made a career out of chasing legends. When he heard about Ashwick, he knew he had found his next story. A place lost to time, shrouded in mystery. It was perfect. Or so he thought. The arrival. David's car rumbled over the cracked asphalt as he entered Ashwick. The air seemed thicker here, heavier. His GPS had given up miles ago, leaving him to rely on the vague directions he'd scribbled in his notebook. "Turn left at the old oak," they said. "Follow the road until the trees swallow the light." He parked near what had once been the town square. A rusted fountain stood at its center, the statue of a woman holding a child almost unrecognizable beneath decades of grime and moss. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves or the distant call of a crow. David stepped out of the car, camera in hand. He snapped a few shots of the fountain, the surrounding buildings, the overgrown streets. But something felt off. The shadows seemed wrong. They moved when they shouldn't, shifting in ways that defied logic. "It's just your imagination," he muttered, shaking his head. But the unease lingered. The first sign. The sun dipped below the horizon as David explored the town. He found the remnants of a school, its playground overtaken by vines, a diner, its booths still intact but coated in dust, and a church, its bell tower leaning precariously. He decided to set up camp in the diner, its walls providing some semblance of security. As he reviewed the day's photos on his laptop, something caught his eye. In one of the shots of the fountain, there was a figure standing in the background. A woman in a tattered dress, her face obscured by shadows. David's heart raced. He had been alone. He was sure of it. "It's a trick of the light," he told himself. But as he looked closer, he noticed the same figure in another photo. And another. Always in the background, always watching. A chill ran down his spine. He closed the laptop and tried to shake off the fear. But that night, as he lay in his sleeping bag, he heard it, a faint whispering, just outside the diner. The whispers. The whispering grew louder as the night wore on, a cacophony of voices speaking words he couldn't understand. David's curiosity got the better of him, and he grabbed his flashlight, stepping outside to investigate. The air was icy, and the town was cloaked in darkness. The beam of his flashlight cut through the fog, revealing empty streets and crumbling buildings. But the whispers continued, drawing him toward the fountain. When he reached it, the whispers stopped. The silence was deafening. Then, he saw her, the woman from the photos. She stood on the other side of the fountain, her head tilted as if studying him. "Who are you?" David called out, his voice trembling. She didn't answer. Instead, she raised her hand and pointed toward the church. Then she vanished, leaving David alone in the suffocating darkness. The church. David hesitated but knew he couldn't leave without understanding what was happening. The church loomed ahead, its warped doors hanging ajar. He stepped inside, the air thick with the scent of mildew and decay. The interior was a mess of broken pews and shattered stained glass. But at the altar, something caught his eye, a book, its leather cover cracked and its pages yellowed with age. He opened it, revealing handwritten entries in a spidery script. The entries spoke of rituals, sacrifices, and a veil that separated this world from another. The townsfolk had been desperate to save Ashwick as the mills closed and the money dried up. They had turned to dark practices, hoping to summon something that could restore their prosperity. But they had summoned something else entirely. David's hands shook as he read the final entry. "The veil is thin. They are coming. God forgive us." A sudden crash echoed through the church, and David spun around. The doors had slammed shut, and in the shadows, shapes began to move. The entities. They were barely human, twisted figures with elongated limbs and hollow eyes that glowed faintly in the dark. Their movements were jerky, unnatural, as they crept closer. David backed toward the altar, clutching the book as if it could protect him. "Stay back," he shouted, his voice breaking. The figures paused, their heads tilting in unison. Then, one of them stepped forward, its voice a guttural rasp. "You should not be here. What happened to this town?" David demanded. "They opened the door," the figure replied. "And we came through." Before David could respond, the entities lunged. He threw the book at them and bolted for the door, his heart pounding. He barely made it out, slamming the doors behind him and running into the night. The escape. David didn't stop running until he reached his car. He fumbled with the keys, his hands trembling, and started the engine. The headlights illuminated the road ahead, and for a moment, he thought he was safe. But as he drove, the whispers returned, louder and more insistent. The shadows seemed to follow him, stretching impossibly long in the glow of his taillights. When he finally reached the highway, the whispers stopped. The night was silent again. But David knew he had brought something back with him. He could feel it, a presence, watching, waiting. The legacy of Ashwick. David's article about Ashwick never saw the light of day. The photos were blank, the recordings filled with static. But the nightmares remained. Every night, he saw the woman, the figures, the town that refused to let him go. And in the quiet moments, when the world was still, he could hear the whispers. Faint, but unmistakable. Ashwick had claimed him, and it was only a matter of time before it claimed more.